Welcome to this week's session, Exposing the Dirt on Dairy.
All right, everyone. Welcome to Afro-Vegan Society's Dump Dairy Workshop Series. And today we are exposing the dirt on dairy with Erin Wing, who is currently serving as a Deputy Director of Investigations for Animal Outlook and who has previously worked as an undercover investigator. And over the course of 2 years, she went on to complete investigations in the dairy, chicken, and aquaculture industries, and is the first ever was part of the first ever undercover expose of salmon aquaculture in the US. Thank you so much for being here, Erin.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be able to share the stories of what I've experienced doing undercover investigations and then also what I witnessed animals go through, specifically in the dairy industry with the two undercover investigations that I conducted over the course of the couple of years that I was undercover. Definitely a lot to share, and I'm really thankful that Afro-Vegan Society holds this workshop every year. It's so informative and it's so very much needed so that people can be aware of what really goes on in the dairy industry.
Thank you so much for saying that. And thank you again for being here. It's so important to have someone like you here coming to speak with us and, just sharing some of your knowledge and just as a person, the level of integrity and caring that you have, it comes through every time you speak. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Um, and so I'm just going to jump into some of the questions here. Our first question is, what was the deciding factor that made you get into and continue this line of work in the first place?
Yeah, it's usually a question when I get questions like that, I take a very long time answering them, so bear with me. Um, it was a journey for me. I mean, I um, when I was younger, I grew up in, low income areas, inner city. I mean, I was born in New York. I was born in Queens, and I grew up a little bit in Manhattan as well, in the projects, raised by a single mother. And I didn't really have access to a lot of like fresh fruits, vegetables, all that stuff. That wasn't sort of my experience growing up. It was more so you go to the corner store, you go to like a bodega or something like that. And that was where, we picked up our groceries. It was really rare that we had, enough money to go to the supermarket and to really like stock up on groceries that were like really nutritious. And like it was mostly animal products that, high in different types of like ingredients that were actually really harmful to myself and then also fellow members of my community. And that was sort of the environment that I grew up in. But I do remember, being younger and feeling like, well, why is it like this, right? Why is it that, fast food restaurants are on every corner, but to get to the supermarket, it was like an hour to walk there if you don't have a vehicle, and then an hour to walk back with all your groceries. So I had this, issue with, being in this type of environment and not having access to a lot of things that people should automatically get, especially when you're a growing young child. And it wasn't until just recently where I realized, okay, this type of environment that I did live in was shaped well before my birth. In the early 1970s, there was actually a government initiative that was put forth, where like in the wake of a lot of like civil unrest that was going on during the late 1960s, then in the early 1970s, they wanted to implement programs that would facilitate economic development in Black communities in an attempt to sort of shift the disparities that these communities have been facing for decades. So the federal government implemented a policy that guaranteed loans for Black owned businesses to combat low unemployment rates in those areas. and larger corporations that actually, produce animal products in partnership with the animal agriculture industry, like your fast food restaurants, for example, saw that as an opportunity to get Black entrepreneurs to become franchisee owners of restaurants that were a part of the fast food chain. So these fast food corporations were able to expand rapidly in those communities that I ended up, growing up in. So eventually they were popping up on every street corner. And instead of there being, independent Black owned businesses, there were a lot of these entrepreneurs who were buying into this franchisee setup. So by the time I was growing up in the 90s, early 2000s, that was the environment that I was in. So I didn't realize how much animal agriculture had affected me, even in, the area that I was growing up in. But now looking back on it, it's just like, okay, I understand that there was a whole process that had taken place to make it so that I was, in a way, affected by animal agriculture without even realizing it. And then fast forward to when I was in, my early to mid 20s, I had finally interacted with someone who was vegan for the first time in my life. And at that point, I was really disenchanted with, working for this business that was just making money. It was retail sales. And I had seen a lot of documentaries that featured undercover investigations footage. And this friend was sharing more documentaries with me, and I was watching them more often. And I saw undercover footage, and I began to connect the dots for how exactly my existence, my upbringing in the area that I grew up in. And since then, I've been sort of affected in a variety of different negative ways by animal agriculture. And I could see the way that the animals were suffering too. And I was very much affected by that as well. And I'd always had this sort of connection with animals. So I think it was just a matter of everything clicking into place where I realized this is where I can be most effective for positive change, for a future where all kinds of individuals who are oppressed, who are exploited in the ways that they are within the animal agriculture system, I would be able to sort of try to move us forward towards a future where that wouldn't be the case. And my focus primarily lied in undercover investigations because I was crazy enough to feel like I could do that. And it was the only thing that I felt like I could do effectively and do it well.
I love that. Like, I mean, I don't, so many of us have seen this undercover footage. I have seen a lot of undercover footage, and my first thought was I could do that, you
Mm.
know. Um, so it means a lot to for you to not only have come up the way that you did and saw the reality, either while you were there or after the fact. A lot of times we see things more clearly as we get older, in hindsight, all of that. Um, and I know that a lot of folks viewing this can relate to this. I know I definitely can, where you're talking about walking an hour to get groceries, you know yeah, like taking 2 buses, and then you still gotta come back on those buses, transfer with all those bags, and you're making sure you're getting more groceries if you can because you don't wanna make that long trip again.
Mhm.
Um, and the fact that you translated that into, this skill set and this need, right? That is really big in our movement space because there's not a lot of investigators, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
like very few.
It's really
Um,
hard to decide to do something like this. And you have to, be able to handle a lot of the things that you see and experience. It's really a lot to for somebody to put themselves through.
mhm. And so that brings me to our next question, Um, as a Black woman, how did you find working in that capacity? Um, whether it's the treatment from farm workers, maybe the owners, you know. What was that like? And what response did you get also from folks in animal rights and vegan movement space?
Um, it's hard for an investigator to be a woman, not
Mm,
even like going into being a black woman. Um, I honestly feel like from what I experienced on farm sites, um, as someone who's also Peruvian, I very much saw a lot of people who were of, um, the descent of like South American countries, and they were here like they came here as immigrants to find work, and they would do like the bare minimum work. And there were a lot of people of that culture, of that racial background. It was really rare that I did see any farm workers or farm owners, for that matter, who were black. So all of my coworkers, most of the time, they were either white or Latino, Hispanic, or something like that. Um, and I worked with a couple of, I mean, I did four different undercover investigations. Um, and yeah, I was pretty much normally the only black person there, and most of the time the only woman there. And it's a really stressful experience. Um, Especially just knowing that, I mean, there were many conversations that, I was a part of where, I was overhearing people, talking about, um, offhanded comments, right? Because if there's no black people in the room and if there's no black people in the area, of course, there will be certain discussions that will take place where you could feel like I could feel the prejudice. And when it came to just being a woman in those spaces, especially in on dairy farms, um, it's just a very strange sensation and experience to be working in an area where these female cows are being exploited, and the way that the workers would refer to their bodies, and using terminology that they would use towards you know women who are, human women. They would use that terminology in a derogatory way towards the female cows. And then I'm standing right next to them and, hearing those things, and I'm in their presence. And yet the language doesn't change, language is still the same. Because at the root of, dairy farming is exploitation. And it's exploiting not only, female cows and their bodies and what they can produce, the milk that they can produce, but also their children, the babies that they birth. Even when it came to male calves, they would not consider them of any value. So just because of, what gender they happen to be born as, they would just be left to die. And at least one of the dairies I investigated. So it's really just hard for me as, the investigator that I am, the identities that that I identify as, and the background that I have, and just seeing all of that, and seeing how these mother cows were having to just lose their babies over and over again, seeing them being violated in ways that would be stomach turning for somebody to see, like in person. Um, yeah, it was really difficult to witness and to bear witness to that, and to also, be there to document it. But I'm glad that I was there, as that person, to be able to, share their experiences, because otherwise they would have been going through that without anybody knowing.
mhm. Yeah, you know, I can feel the pain of it as you speak, and I can imagine it. Um, I've really never been on a dairy farm personally. And I don't think most folks have, right? But I've been next to it, working in in the field, you know, working with species in danger of extinction to
Mhm.
conserve those species, and literally across the road from this precious hot springs where this one species exists nowhere else in the world was this dairy farm. And as I was working to um do a population estimate of the fishes in that stream, I'm hearing this like braying noise. And I was like, what is this? Why do the cows sound like they're crying? And it was gut wrenching, and they sounded so forlorn. And
Mhm.
they saw us working outside their fence, and they kept like screaming to us, you know, and um the senior biologist who was there had been there before. And um I asked him, have the cows acted like this before? I've never seen a cow act like this before. Why are they? And they were leaning on each other and grooming each other, but they looked so tired as well,
Mhm.
And they were comforting each other. And he said, "Oh yeah, they probably just took away the calves." And it dawned on me, "Oh wow, this is their morning song."
Mhm.
Right? And they're looking to us because they see that we're humans, and the humans took their calves, right? Um, and knowing what I know about mammals, knowing what I know specifically about ungulates, like about cows, hooved animals, right? Um, I know that bond it develops very quickly, because it has to, right? They have to be able to move quickly once that calf is born. It really hit me then. It hadn't hit me before. Um, and I'm telling this story because it feels as though that's similar to the experience you had, because you're hearing these words, these that they're using them like slurs, to talk about the cows. They're disparaging the cows. For what reason? I wonder, like, is it because, they're looked at as the ones causing the work, or they're causing them trouble? It sounds like a hostile environment all the way around. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that, and I want to touch on what you just mentioned too, as well, because it wasn't a one-off experience for you, right? That's the experience across the board for a lot of cows in the dairy industry, where they do lament, they do mourn the loss of their children. And it was something that I witnessed on multiple occasions when I was working specifically at a dairy farm in Southern California, where I had witnessed and documented this one mother cow, and she was in a maternity area, well, what they called the maternity pen at that facility that I investigated, and I ended up walking there to check on some of the animals in that area, and there were two dead calves in the same area where the mothers were, and that was something that happened frequently, where they would just leave the dead babies where the mothers were, who had birthed them. And when I went into that area, um, I was, seeing the two dead calves on the ground, and then I saw one of the mothers walk up and bend her head down and sniff at the corpses there. And she brought her head up and looked at me, and then she started to vocalize. She started to, make those noises that you just described, while looking at me. And it was like that was something that was really an intense experience for me, because it was like she didn't understand, well, why are these babies left like this? Why are they dead here? What is going on? They don't understand. They are just, there, and they don't understand why this is the reality. This is the existence that they have to live in. And then she's looking to me, most likely for some type of help, like, help in some way. And there's nothing I could do. And to feel that powerless in the face of this mother who was an animal, but still a mother, mourning the loss of those babies, was a really just, I think, a very impactful experience for me. And there was, another occasion where I saw a male calf who had been left in the dirt, and this is Southern California, it gets really hot. And they were outside, all of the time, pretty much all the cows and the calves. And then this one calf is lying in the dirt, and he's really breathing heavily. He can't stand. He can barely lift his head. So he's clearly, very ill. And there was a mother cow who walked up while I was, documenting this calf who was experiencing some type of, illness or something like that. And I watched her and documented her trying to lift up the baby's head with her snout, and trying to get them to stand up again. So she was trying to help this baby calf who was, clearly in distress. So they have such strong maternal instincts. Specifically the cows that they breed in the dairy industry, the Holstein black and white cows. They breed them and use them so exclusively because they have strong maternal instincts, and that's in, their genetics. That's the reason why they utilize them in the industry. It's like one of the good qualities that they look for in those animals is the strong maternal instincts. And to see that quality about them is so exploited in such a way, in such a really agonizing way, it's really sad. But yeah, to what you were talking about too, when it comes to just the derogatory terms that the workers would use towards animals, it definitely is the environment. And again, it's something that I had to realize, is that the workers don't shape the environment. The environment is something that they participate in as employees. So they don't have power over that structure. It is the animal agriculture industry as a whole that makes it so that, they're looking at the genetics of these animals. They're breeding them in a specific way, and they're utilizing and really, exploiting these qualities about these animals so that they can profit off of them, and assembling this entire system that makes it so that they're using their bodies for profit. And when you have an environment where there's such a power structure and a dynamic where these are the products and these are the people who are, wielding and using and handling these products, who are sentient beings like these mother cows and their babies, of course they're going to look at them in a specific way that is less than when they're participating by working in an industry that exploits them.
Yeah. And there's probably like a built up callousness, right? That comes as well. You kind of maybe have to do that to survive, you know?
Yeah, it's a desensitization, and it happens. And specifically when it comes to dairy facilities, I mean, these workers are dealing with these animals that weigh upwards from 1 ton per animal, and they get very frightened. I mean, if a dairy cow or a Holstein cow decides to lay down, I mean, it's really hard to get her to stand back up. If she collapses, it's hard to get her to stand back up. Meanwhile, if you have a cow who has collapsed in a milking area, and they're blocking the way for other cows to get milked. That's holding up the workday. And workdays can last for like 10 hours at least or more, for these people to be working in these environments. It's really loud. It's really, it's unsafe. I mean, you're operating heavy machinery, working with these very large and frightened animals, and having to meet, a schedule, because these cows get milked twice a day usually, at these facilities, and the shift has to end at some point, and after it ends there has to be some sort of like cleaning that gets done. So they'll rinse
Mhm.
away a lot of the feces that builds up in the area, in the milking area, a lot of the waste. They'll rinse that away, and it has to be ready for the next shift, because the next shift starts as soon as the first shift ends. So if it's a night shift, once they're done at like 7 a.m., then the day shift starts and then ends at 7 p.m. And then it goes on and on and on. And then the night shift starts up at 7 p.m., ends at 7 a.m., and so on and so forth. So it's a constant thing. So if there's a cow who has collapsed and they're blocking the way for other cows to go in the milking area, specifically with one of the investigations I did at the California farm,
Mhm.
the workers used whatever tools they needed to get her to move, because they just saw her as an obstruction. They didn't see her as a living being. So they ended up attaching a metal hip clamp to her hips, and then attaching that with a chain to a tractor bucket, and then dragging her, when she could not stand, out of that area. And then, because of the way that the milking area was set up, they ended up lifting her up by her hips that were attached to that tractor bucket. So they made the tractor bucket go up, and she was just dangling, and they pretty much airlifted her out, of that area where she's just suspended by her hip bones alone. And that was one of the, I think, frightening experiences for me to witness, because I was scared for her, because I
Mhm.
didn't know if the chain might break, if the tractor might give out because of, how much weight she has, and if she fell, like how horrible that would be to go through as, a living being. But those were the lengths that those workers went through to get her to move, just so that they could go back to what they were doing, go back to the work schedule and the routine. So yeah, it's definitely, an environment that encourages workers to not see these animals as individuals, as living beings who are capable of experiencing pain, because there's no way that they could register that and still be able to do the work every day, because it's
No.
it's impossible.
Right. And also they're probably, if we look at that system in its entirety, they're also units of that production. So if that's the case, then they'd have to also look at their position in the work as well. Um, and like you said, they don't have control over the way that it's structured. You know, um, I have two questions around that. It makes me wonder, you know, what a day really looks like, because it sounds like you're saying like these cows don't get rest. It's basically 24/7. You are being milked until you have no milk left or you fall down. And then it starts all over again with the next set of cows if they're taken out. Yeah. Wow. So I know that some people might say, well, maybe it's just that one place, maybe it's not necessarily the standard. I think that's the standard, right?
100%. I mean, in order for, a farm to be successful, they have to for a dairy farm to be successful, and specifically, they have to keep their cows pregnant. They have to keep them producing milk. The only way that the cows can produce milk is if they are impregnated. And that, again, is just a very visceral violation of their bodily autonomy, right? Because they have to inseminate them, in order for them to get pregnant. And that involves a lot of, inserting into, various body parts for those cows. And that's something that they have to go through on a regular, basis in order for them to be impregnated and produce the milk, because the milk is, the product. So they have to be pregnant, they have to give birth. And then once they give birth, they will go and start being milked. First, they'll produce colostrum, which is, the first milk. And that's the milk that, even human women will produce as well after they give birth. And that colostrum is, sometimes is given to the babies so that they can get the antibodies. But after that first milk, they're going through, like they go through the milking area twice a day, every day, because they produce that much milk. And that's because of their genetics. That's because that's how they've been bred. It's not really a natural thing for them to produce that much milk, but it's down to a science for this industry to make the best milk producers so that they can get their money's worth out of these animals. So yeah, they'll go through the milking area twice a day, every day. Their lifespan is normally 15 years or so, 15 to 20 years. In the dairy industry, they'll stop, they'll end up being sent to slaughter at about like 5 years. And I've definitely seen some cows collapse from just exhaustion. They collapse because it's completely unnatural for them to be in an environment that is completely concrete. Even if they're out in the pasture, some people say, okay, well, there's dairy farms that they'll let them out in the grass, but they still have to milk them. The milk has to, be taken from them because it's for, the product that whatever farm produces, and that is sold in stores and that people purchase. So they still have to go through that milking process, and it is intense. They can get various injuries. They can get illnesses, things like mastitis that will infect their udders, and it will be very painful for them. They'll get injuries from, constantly, having to walk through these milking areas, constantly being like on concrete, or being in this really like highly populated area with so many other cows. And they can get injuries from, just being in those spaces and not having enough space, or, falling down in the milking areas because they're trying to get these cows to go through at, a certain pace. I've seen cows fall down and collapse. And usually if they fall, they can get injuries to their legs. And a cow who has an injury to her leg, that's pretty much it for her. If she can't stand, then there's no point in them keeping her alive because she can't go into the milking area. So they'll probably end up sending her to slaughter. So it's all about, this production cycle. It's not necessarily a place where they're cultivating, this loving environment. It's a business. And that's what people really have to realize when it comes to any of these places, especially when it comes to just handling these animals who are capable of experiencing a wealth of different emotions, but they're relegated to just their genetics, just their, what they're able to produce with their bodies. And yeah, I mean, in terms of just a place being not as bad, I mean, 95%, upwards of 95% of these farms have, a certain industry structure and industry standard. And 100% of these places, they're trying to make money or else they wouldn't be doing it.
And that's the key, right? A lot of the times I think folks forget that part, you know. Um, Also, I think one of the things that we don't think about is, um, you know, the truth that when you're in an industry, there are industry standards, and a lot of these industry standards are almost industry requirements, you know? And if you don't meet those, you may not get a loan next year, you may not this or that or the other thing. So it's self-perpetuating, um, which to me is either genius or diabolical, but or both. Um, you know, uh, and I was gonna ask you about, what are the real dangers? To workers, to cows, um, and you've mapped out a lot of them, just the danger of being in the proximity of such large animals. I was on a sanctuary, as at Vine Sanctuary, and I was around all these cows. It was wonderful, but they're very large. And when there's a multiple of them, that's intimidating. I also went vegan because of an article I read that involved a dairy worker talking about what they went through as well. Because I was vegetarian before that. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of the workers, we understand, or we have probably seen several different articles that talk about the mental health issues and things like that. But um, are there is it a different kind of industry standard that people know about, like what workers routinely go through?
Right. I mean, just to be dealing with, I mean, one of both of the farms that I worked at, one of the dairy farms I worked at had 900 cows. 900, and they did not have 900 employees. They had about like maybe 10 or so, like that many employees to deal
10.
with 900 cows. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So, I mean, 10, 13 maybe, but nowhere near 900. There's not a person per cow. I mean, it's impossible because you have so many animals. And then these workers, I mean, there will be typically maybe like two workers, at least from the experiences that I had at both of the farms that I investigated, both the dairy farms I investigated, had two workers in the milking area and maybe three. And then one other
Mm.
worker would be moving the cows so that they would, go into the milking area. So that's not a lot of people to be dealing with all of these cows. At the other dairy facility I investigated, the one in California, there were 1,000 cows, like over 1,000 cows. And they pack them in really tightly into those milking areas, and they get really
Mm.
frightened. Like the cows get really frightened. The workers are trying to get them to move, and it's a very dangerous situation to be in. You're around a lot of like really heavy equipment, and you're dealing with these, really frightened animals. I've heard a lot of stories about um, like from workers that I worked alongside where there was one woman who was working with, some cows. I don't know if it was at that dairy facility or another one that I hadn't investigated. But from what I was being told, this woman was, handling this cow in a specific way, and the cow just tossed their head, and then it knocked into like their head knocked into the woman, and she flew across the room and hit her head. She had to get brain surgery after that. And the only thing that really saved like her memory and her mental faculties and her brain capacity is that she was bilingual. So she ended up, speaking Spanish, and that was a way that, while they were like operating on her brain, that was the way that she was able to retain most of her faculties. But um, that was something to where I kept that in mind every time I was around those cows and making sure that I wasn't in a position where that would happen to me. Um, and then when it comes to just, other things that I've personally had happen to me, I mean, being in the back of, one of the milking areas and trying to get the cows to move forward, and being stuck, in a crowd of cows. And the workers are trying to get them through as fast as possible. So they normally will pack in that space that's right behind the milking area where they're going to herd them in. And they usually go in rows. So there'll be one side, the other side, and there'll be a row of cows on each side in the milking areas. And then you have the workers in between, and they're hooking them up to the machines. But in order to get them in those rows, they have to have, enough cows in the back of the area. And that's where they would pack them all in. I ended up being in a position where I had gotten stuck between a cow and a gate that was behind me. And I got a bit of a back injury because the cow didn't realize I was there. And, I'm small. I'm only 5'2". So obviously I wasn't going to win a fight if I was going to, try to fight my way through this area that I was stuck in. So, I mean, I had to wait for the cow to walk away. She didn't even realize that I was there. And, that's sort of a reality, an everyday, situation to be in, especially when you're in that milking area, for example. A lot of these workers are attaching milking equipment to cows who are standing there, and just their hooves are like at face level. So if a cow decides to kick because you're attaching milking equipment to her and it's very uncomfortable for it to be attached to her udders, your face is like right there. If you're a worker and attaching the equipment, so they could get kicked in the face. I thought about that every single time that I was performing those job duties, because it's a high risk of injury where a cow can, kick back and not even realize where they're kicking, because they're just reacting to the sensation, to the pain or whatever it is they're experiencing, and can kick in a worker in the face. And that could be really a devastating injury that they can experience.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. Like, even if we think about being in a space with 900 or 1,000 people, there's injuries that occur with less people, much less, 1 ton sentient beings, or ton and change. um, Wow. And they're so big. Also, just thinking through the size of the farm itself, just even getting around a farm like that, if you're saying like there's a finite amount of workers for the number of cows, and then you've got a sprawling farm and you have to get to X place in order for Y to happen, in order for production to continue. That's nerve-wracking in itself.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what you experience daily.
Yes. And some workers will have different duties, right? So some of them will be in the milking area, some of them will be, trying to get the cows to move and whatnot. And then not only are you having to, deal with the cows themselves, you have to deal with the environment. That is very horrible. There's waste piled so deep that your boots can sink in, and it's like mud, but it's all waste. And there can be areas on the farm sites like that. And if workers are getting their boots stuck, how are they supposed to move? Like, what if a cow is like running, and they're in, their path? And not only that, but at one of the farm sites that I worked at, one of the job duties that I had was sprinkling this like a calcium powder on the bedding for the cows. And I just had to go to each, stall and put the powder on the bedding. And then I look at the bag one day and it says this is a cancer causing chemical that's in it. And that's what I only had to be at those places for about, 3 months, 6 months or something like that. I can only imagine workers who work there for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 10 years, some people being exposed to that. So that was, just my experience. And in the case of Animal Outlook, as an organization that conducts investigations, we in the past had an investigator conduct an investigation at a dairy facility, and they were using formaldehyde, like a lot of formaldehyde without, a lot of protection equipment to have the cows like step into the formaldehyde with their hooves. And workers were having to handle formaldehyde, on a regular basis. So yeah, there's a lot of just crazy things that people don't think about when it comes to the risks that workers have to deal with when they're at dairy facilities. So yeah, when I think of dairy farming, I just think it is exploitative and encompasses all facets of exploitation, not only when it comes to the cows, but the people who are, in that system, in the environment, and it's toxic for everybody involved from, and then these are people who have to risk their safety. These are animals that have to go through so much suffering and torment. And these people who have nothing to do it will never, really go into those places and do the work. These corporations, these entities will profit from all of that suffering at the end of the day.
Mm. And thanks for that breakdown, because it really makes it real, right? And I have two more questions for you. Um, One thing I wanted to ask is, if there's an example, you've spoken about so much that you've witnessed, but is there something that is just ingrained in your mind to this day?
I There are a lot of things that are actually ingrained in my mind, and specifically coming from doing dairy investigations, um, because it's this unique environment where I witness life and birth, and I witness death, and all of that taking place at these facilities, and then interacting with um, these young animals, babies just being born, was not something that I ever did up until I started doing dairy investigations. So I think, my takeaway from those experiences is that a lot of what I witnessed there stayed with me. I developed a really profound love for cows because I could see what they were going through. Um, and I guess when it comes to just if I can pick out a specific memory, speaking of the industry standards and the standard practices, right? One practice that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to dairy farming, because a lot of people think that dairy farming is the less cruel option because um, it doesn't have anything, like, people perceive it to not have anything directly to do with slaughter, because the cows are being kept alive, right, to produce milk. But a lot of people don't realize that eventually the cows, will not be able to produce milk anymore, and then they end up getting sent to slaughter anyway, and that's what goes into like hamburgers and things like that. But specifically when it comes to just something that I can pinpoint was with regards to standard practice was the practice that a lot of people don't know about when it comes to disbudding and dehorning of young calves.
Mm.
That was something that I witnessed and documented taking place at one of the dairy farms I investigated. And this is something that is an industry standard across the board. At least like 95% of dairy farms will have to do this. They'll have to disbud or dehorn their cows because they want to eliminate the chance of the horns, injuring workers. So it's a like a safety precaution that they take, but they have
Mm.
to disfigure these animals. They have to mutilate them, and the way that they do that is to take a hot iron and heat it up to a really high temperature. And there's a metal bit at the end that is a little sharp, and they place that on top of the skulls of the baby calves, and they'll chip away and burn away the horn tissue, and then just continue to chip away at it, and then until it like pops off, and it'll
Mhm.
be the little tiny horn bud that they're trying to remove from their heads. The thing that is so, I guess, visceral about it for me, and that stays in my mind, is that at the dairy farm that I worked at in Pennsylvania, where the disbudding took place, they didn't use any anesthetic. So the calves could feel every single bit, every second of the pain of, being burned, their flesh being burned on the tops of their heads, and having their horn buds, chipped away at with that device. And I could definitely tell that they were experiencing pain. Like, they would be restrained by the workers who would tie them to the sides of their stalls that they were being kept in,
Mm.
and they wouldn't be able to move. So they would, as soon as the process started, they would try to like pull away from their restraints. They would kick, they would buck, they would vocalize, they would scream. And then eventually they would resign to what was happening to them because they realized they couldn't escape. So it's like, for me, it reminded me of when, there's a baby in a crib and they're crying and crying and crying, and then nobody goes to pick them up. So eventually they stop crying. And that's what happened with these calves, where they stopped trying to fight it. They stopped trying to scream out and cry out for help. So eventually, the only thing that they ended up doing was grinding their teeth because it was
Mm.
so painful. And they were trying to brace themselves against the pain because it's like they can't escape it. So all they could do, because they were so powerless, was to endure it and, wait for it to be over.
Mm.
And I can remember the smell of their skin burning. I can remember the sound of their teeth grinding. This is really, really like distinct sound. Um, so I think, in terms of things that I remember, disbudding and dehorning, that standard practice, um, is
Mm.
really just horrible to witness.
Yeah, it sounds that way. Thank you you know, for taking that moment to go back there with us. It's hard to listen to, but it's important for us to know. And I know it must have been hard to recount. So I really do mean thank you. Um, Deep gratitude. So the last question, um, in all of this that we've been talking about today, what are some key points you'd like Black folks to understand about dairy farms? And what do you want us to understand about cows?
Hmm. Dairy farms are a business. 100% they are focused on profit. Any type of, advertising, any type of promotional things where they include smiling cows, they include people enjoying drinking milk, saying that it's good for you, strong bones, all of that stuff. Those are all to continue to pull in as many profits as possible. And it's really imperative for us to be able to see past all of that, to the reality of the situation. What is the reality of dairy farming? And when it gets to the point where you see a lot of, the dairy industry attacking alternative milks, um, instead of, I would say, instead of framing it as, oh, this is happening, it's like, why is this happening? Why are they doing this? Why are they making it, trying to defend themselves and saying, oh, that's not all farms if there's an investigation that comes out. But how many investigations have to come out um, on dairy farms before we start to understand, okay, there's a pattern here.
Hmm.
This is, not the exception, it's the norm, it's the standard. Um, and that's why it's important to, even if it is hard for us to look into undercover investigations of dairy facilities, when it comes to increasing our understanding and our knowledge of what the dairy industry really is, um, the raw, unfiltered version of it, that's what we will get from investigations, because it's literally the power of investigations. And to put it plainly is, if people know that, if people know that they're going to have company over to their house, what are they going to do? They're going to clean up. They're going to, put nice smelling things out. They're going to put out their like best stuff. And that's what happens when it comes to just how the dairy industry wants to portray itself. But what happens when, people aren't expecting company? That's when you get the realness of like what people are really like. If you just show up and, you see things for what they really are. And that's essentially what investigations are, is just showing what is going on at these places when people think that nobody's watching. And then you get to see the reality of how exploitative it is. I mean, 100%. When we think about the term, um, you know, profit, profit off of, vulnerable individuals, um, in every facet of it, right? When it comes to the animals in the system, the workers in the system, um, it's exploitation, like complete 100%. And you can see it, especially in investigations, you can see it 100%. So I'm just really glad to be able to be here to really share that information. And yeah, that's dairy farming, I would say.
Wow. Um, this was really so helpful. I've been vegan a long time, and this is gonna definitely keep me vegan, definitely. Not that there was any doubt that I would ever change, but it's heartening to know that you were able to get out of those places in one piece, and share this knowledge with us. Thank you for your contribution to the movement that we're a part of. Thank you for sharing this with us here at Afro-Vegan Society. And we look forward to having you back if you have space, to talk. It would be really lovely. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Any parting words or tips, anything?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, love, love, love the work that Afro-Vegan Society does. I have admired it, what the organization has been able to do for so long. So to be able to participate and, help out in any way with sharing, whatever knowledge I have and the experiences I have, specifically when it comes to, the dairy investigations that I've done, because they hit me so hard. So whenever I'm able to, share that information, 100%, to be able to share it for the Dump Dairy Workshop. I really do hope that it helps people to really gain more of a deeper understanding of what the dairy industry is really like. So I'm very happy to be here. Anytime I would be very happy to come back and share more. I guess when it comes to cows in general, again, like I mentioned, I have developed just a profound love for cows. They are very big. They can be scary, but I encourage people to like go out and look for a sanctuary, see, what they're really like, see them as the, individuals that they are. Um, and they're so fun to be around if you want to be brave. But they're really fearful too. Like they will probably be as afraid of you as you are of them. It's just that if they're afraid and they start to move real quick, then you might want to, get out of the way. But they can be, total sweethearts too. Like I was just at my local sanctuary last week, and one of the cows there, his name is Ferd. He ended up, he was laying down, and I went up next to him, and I sat down next to him. That's the closest I'd ever been to him, and I'd been volunteering at that sanctuary for about like 4 years now. And I just got the chance to sit right next to him, and he was really tired. It was a really nice day, and he ended up falling asleep and resting his head on my shoulder. And he has his horn still, so I was just like, okay. And he, fell asleep, and then he woke up and he was drooling and everything, and I was just like, wow. I really had a cow like rest his head on my shoulder, and his head is as big as like my torso. So that was, it's a crazy experience, but it touched my heart so deeply because, I'd seen like individuals like him in the most horrible situations, but to see that, to be able to see him, separate from the industry, separate from how like the industry wants them to be seen, separate from like, I still have like one of the tags from, one of the dairy farms that I worked at. This is a number that was attributed to a cow. And they assign them numbers, not names, because they don't want people to understand what they're really like. So anytime that we can like break out of that and get to know them as like animals and the sentient beings that they are, I think it's sort of a step in the right direction for us to increase our understanding.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Erin. That sweet, sweet story there warmed my heart. Um, and my heart is full for very many reasons. And, I know our viewers are going to love this. So thank you again for being a part of Afro-Vegan Society's Dump Dairy Workshop series. Folks, please go to afrovegansociety.org. Go to our Dump Dairy resource library. Take a look at some of the past workshops we've had, and stay tuned for the next workshop we have coming up next week. Take care.
Thanks so much for watching. To learn more about how to remove dairy from your diet, download our free Dairy-Free Living Guide today.